morning, everyone. Welcome to the CLX Logistics webcast discussion of transportation bids. My name is Mike Chalman. I'm very glad that you're able to join us today, and I promise that we'll conclude within the time that you've allotted to us in your busy schedules. We're extremely fortunate to have received a tremendous amount of interest in this webcast. There are over 70 registrants. Because of the large group size, we won't be able to entertain any questions or comments during the webcast. But before we conclude, I'll provide contact information for anyone who wishes to follow up with questions or other discussion items. Before we dive into the meat of the presentation, I'd like to give some background on the CLX Logistics folks that you'll be hearing from today. As I mentioned, my name is Mike Chalman, and I'm Vice President of North American Operations for CLX Logistics. I've been with the company since early 2012 and have spent the past 23 years working for several third-party and asset-based logistics companies. Prior to that, I served in the Air Force as an air battle manager. I'm responsible for our truck, rail, and brokerage managed services operations in North America, as well as our carrier programs, which includes the bid management discipline that we'll be discussing today. Joining me here at our North American headquarters in Blue Bell, PA, is John Mernicki. John is our carrier program manager, responsible for our core carrier activity, carrier qualification, rate negotiations and contracts, as well as North American benchmarks and bids. He's been with CLX Logistics for almost 7 years, and his background includes a logistics degree from Penn State, plus over 20 years in transportation and logistics, including time in frontline operations for both liquid, bulk, and dry van carriers. Today's webcast will consist of several parts. First, a brief review of some of the key items to consider when developing a bid plan and to effectively manage rates and capacity in today's market, including a quick examination of current market conditions and their potential impact on your bid strategy. An overview of potential bid strategies and approaches that can be used to secure the most competitive rates and capacity. And finally, a look at 2 case studies of bids that were conducted in 2013, so the information is very current. For those of you who participated in our webcasts earlier this summer about benchmarking, you heard us share that effective management of rates, capacity, and carrier relationships is about much more than just finding ways to cut carrier rates. My own experience has been that you can almost always find a lower rate, but that doesn't mean you'll end up paying less when all is said and done and you factored in fuel, other accessorials, claims, service failures, and customer satisfaction. And it also doesn't mean that you'll be able to get access to capacity at those rates when you need it. When considering or designing a bid program, it's important to understand your current market position. For example, are your rates better, worse, or flat compared to other shippers whose products and networks are similar to your own? How long has it been since you've assessed your rates or had a procurement event? Do you have a good understanding of where the market is headed, or are you shooting in the dark? It's also important to recognize the crucial relationship between rates and capacity. Are you getting trucks where and when you need them, or do you find yourself scrambling to cover loads? Are you able to depend on a stable base of carriers, or are you subject to broker support? And do you find that you need to go to the spot market more frequently than you'd prefer in order to get the capacity that you need? And finally, a critical area where many shippers don't spend much time is assessing whether you have a reputation as a desirable shipper when carriers are considering multiple options in the increasingly competitive market. Are your shipment plans reliable? Are your shipping locations efficient? And are your customers ready to receive when the truck arrives? Do you pay freight invoices in a timely and accurate manner? And that assumes, of course, that the carrier has submitted a good bill. So on a related note, do your carriers know what is needed from them in order to get paid in a timely and correct manner? And overall, do you do a better, worse, or comparable job versus your peers to keep carriers' trucks moving? Now, before I turn things over to John to take you through a review of bid strategies and the case studies, I want to briefly look at some current market conditions and their impact on whether it makes sense to be considering a bid at this time. Even before the latest drama in Washington, which of course is still unresolved at this point, there has been a lot going on in the regulatory arena that impacts transportation. There are a number of issues which we have been closely following. As you may be aware, there is ongoing and vigorous debate about the validity of CSA scores and how they should or should not be used. Also, the latest change to hours of service requirements this past July raised a good bit of concern within the industry. There is also continued activity surrounding requirements for electric onboard logging. And fairly recently, the FMCSA has started to put some focus on sleep apnea and its potential impact on motor carrier safety. We don't have time today to discuss these issues in detail, but I will offer that our assessment is that none of these things should have an impact on pursuing bid activity at this time. You may be hearing some amount of noise from the carrier community on some or all of these topics, but we've been monitoring for any material impact on either capacity availability or carrier costs, and to date, any impact that we're seeing is relatively small. Another cost driver that we monitor is fuel. While the past few years have seen significant increases in fuel prices, everything we're reading and hearing today suggests that for the foreseeable future, fuel prices are expected to be stable. So again, there is nothing happening in this area that should preclude pursuing a normal bid strategy. One area that does warrant some discussion is the relationship between driver capacity and the improving economy. The top graph here summarizes industry capacity, and the bottom graph shows trends in U.S. industrial production. The dotted line that connects them is joining them at a common point in time, early 2013, so it's easier to assess the two data sources in relation to each other. As you can see from the green and red highlights, during the Great Recession, driver capacity declined by more than 200,000. Since that low point, it has begun to return, but this year it is still nearly 100,000 drivers below where it was in 2007. At the same time, U.S. industrial production has returned to 2007 levels and is expected to continue climbing in the coming year. In other words, production is now at the same level that it was 6 years ago, but industry capacity is still short by nearly 100,000. Further, the rate of increase in production is expected to be higher than the rate at which capacity will return, meaning that the gap between these two measures is going to continue to grow as we move into 2014 and beyond. As a result, now is probably a very good time to be planning a bid, as by early next year, the pendulum will have swung more in favor of carriers and will continue to swing that way for the foreseeable future. So with that background, I'll now turn this presentation over to John to describe the bidding strategy that CLX has utilized successfully and to review the two recent bid case studies. John?
Thanks, Mike, and good morning, everybody. A good strategy is critical for a successful bid result. A well-thought-out bid will understand where you are in the marketplace, how desirable your freight is, and will be backed with overall solid market intelligence. In today's environment, size does not necessarily matter in order to get good rates. Market knowledge can allow the little guy to get rates similar to the big guy, as we've discussed in our prior benchmark webcasts. Use of the proper tool is important. You can run a successful bid with spreadsheets or online software. Both have advantages and disadvantages, and understanding which option is appropriate for your needs will allow you to maximize the results. If you're running a small bid with limited carriers and will focus strictly on the lowest price, a spreadsheet may be sufficient. If you're running a more complex bid and or need post-bid optimization capabilities, an online software package is probably the better choice. The bid setup and carrier training complement the tool that you ultimately select. Setting up the bid works in concert with your tool of choice. Providing training to the participants allows them to focus on the critical components of the bid without getting bogged down with the formatting details, for example. When the participants can spend their time focused on the bid elements and not on the method used to collect their responses, your event will be more successful. The key is to allow them to focus on the pricing, not the entry format. Once a bid concludes its active phase, there's always an opportunity to fine-tune the results. This can be accomplished via optimization scenarios, final negotiations, or a combination of both. Most online software will provide some level of optimization capability. Scenarios can be basic or complex, depending on your particular needs. Keeping these points in mind will get the bid activity headed into the right direction. But there are other decisions that need to be made. First, you'll need to determine what level of detail your event should include. The comprehensive bid involves all the existing and projected freight. The comprehensive approach will bid out all the lanes and volumes for the modes included in your bid. It's going to capture all the freight and essentially reset all carrier rates moving forward. For those lanes in which there are currently best-in-class or top-tier pricing, there'll be some exposure to potential rate increases. The comprehensive bid is typically undertaken in situations in which the existing rates are somewhat outdated and spot contracts are being utilized with increasing frequency. Depending upon the number of lanes you need to bid, the scope can sometimes be overwhelming. In those cases, our experience has been that breaking up the lanes into sub-events, which allows the participants to focus on a limited set of data at any given time, works better. A surgical bid involves targeting only those lanes in which you believe you have opportunities to secure savings. The lanes that you have very competitive pricing on will be left out of the surgical bid. In this case, the bid will focus on just the high potential lanes. Typically, a surgical bid will take place in the interim between comprehensive bids. There can be several reasons why a surgical bid would be used. Perhaps new businesses come online, or circumstances have changed, making a specific group of lanes more desirable to your carrier base, or the market conditions in general may have swung into your favor, more so than the last time you ran a bid. The primary goal is to protect the existing good rates and improve the less desirable ones at the same time. There are two basic bid types that can be used. A manual bid is the first method. Generally, a manual bid involves the use of spreadsheets or other documents that are sent out to the participants on an individual basis. The participants then fill in the requested information and return it back to you. The only feedback they receive comes directly from you after you've evaluated their proposal. While this method focuses on the one-on-one relationship between the shipper and carrier, it can be somewhat limited and may lead to secondary savings opportunities being missed. We'll discuss those in just a few minutes. Additionally, with this type of RFP, participants may be able to edit the response format, whether you want them to or not, which can make consolidating the responses more difficult than is needed. The second method is what we refer to as automated bids. Automated bids are run online using web-based software. These applications can be programmed to show immediate feedback to each participant. The level of feedback provided should be configurable so that you can control what they see. Using an online application also creates a standardized response from each participant, which will then be automatically consolidated together after the bid concludes. Our experience with several of these packages has been that the secondary savings that are generated in the automated environment as participants adjust pricing in search of better ranking. Depending upon the configuration used, the participant may see their rank but not know what their leading rate is, unless they're ranked number one, of course, and then begin to lower their pricing in order to improve their position. If you use a standard spreadsheet bid, this type of savings doesn't occur until after you've been able to evaluate the consolidated responses and provide your feedback to each participant. Another note about automated bids. They aren't necessarily auctions. An auction implies that the best-ranked participant will be awarded the lane upon conclusion of the bid. In an automated event, the shipper should always reserve the right to award the freight as they see fit. The participants are encouraged to submit the best pricing possible, but at the same time, they know that the lane award criteria factors in other things such as safety, service, history, capacity, etc. Now that we've covered the various bidding options, let's take a look at two real-life case studies. In both cases, the bids were run within the past 5 months, so the examples are current. Both clients utilized the CLX bid team, and we applied our standard operating procedures for both. However, as we always do with every client, each bid was individually tailored to the specific needs of the client as well as the unique characteristics of the mode involved. We do have a standardized process that we follow, but the end result is never a one-size-fits-all solution. The first example involves a shipper that bid out their ocean dry container freight. As you can see, they have a fairly large volume of TEUs and a sizable annual spend. But regardless of size, a knowledgeable shipper with the right strategy can still achieve good results. The bid itself was for their North American outbound freight. Their order patterns have little seasonality, and they've established relationships with many steamship lines. Their previous bid activity in 2012 was handled in-house by their transportation department. Excel spreadsheets were used, but each carrier ended up customizing the spreadsheets prior to submitting their proposals. This led to issues on the back end of the bid, as they had to work to reconfigure the results received with the format that they needed in order to analyze and operate. This caused quite a bit of rework on their part and slowed down the process. One of the bigger challenges they faced was that the transportation group personnel had full-time jobs in addition to the time needed to manage the bid event. To properly manage an event of this size really becomes a full-time job in and of itself. As with most tasks, the time you put in is reflected in the results achieved. It's simple enough to throw the bid information out to the market, provide the minimum level of detail and support, but that won't lead to the best results. Taking the time to clearly and completely answer carrier questions and ensure that they have as much detail as possible can be time-consuming. However, it is ultimately time well spent, as the results will be more reflective of reality. The last thing that you want is for the bid to be run, business awarded, and then have a carrier indicate that the rate or rates aren't valid because they misunderstood the criteria. They also experienced several staff changes that required new personnel take time to get acquainted with the bid and delayed the process, as this turnover actually happened twice during the time frame involved. In both cases, while they didn't have to go completely back to square one, it did force them to take several steps backwards each time. Finally, as noted before, each carrier submitted individual accessorial tariffs, so no true apples-to-apples comparisons could be done looking strictly at their line haul cost. Each lane award had to be evaluated after factoring in the variations in charges between carriers. So what were their results? Because they used an offline method, participants received feedback only once the shipper had time to evaluate the results. The shipper spent quite a bit of time working with each carrier in the post-bid rate negotiations. These were not discussions to fine-tune the results, but the actual initial feedback to the carriers. Carriers then needed time to determine if they were going to further adjust any of their initial rate submissions. By not seeing the real-time market feedback, the carriers were unable to make further rate adjustments until the shipper reached out to them. In an online event, they would have received this information while the bid was in progress and could make at least some of those adjustments on the fly. The shipper also commented that the process felt disorganized. Some of this was due to the turnover they experienced during the bid timeline, as each person was learning as they went along. The institutional knowledge and processes were not fine-tuned, and they didn't have a standard process that they could use as a guideline. Running the transportation bid will have an impact on the bottom line, and it's not something that you typically want to be learning as you go. The cost ramifications of on-the-job training can be significant. One of the downsides of an offline activity is that the participants may be able to alter the bid format and return their submissions in an edited format. Normally, when this happens, you have two choices. You can either reject the altered format, causing additional delays as the participant reworks the information, or you can choose to reformat the data on your side, getting it into a format that you need in order to evaluate it, which causes more work for you. Either way, in this case, someone has to do some rework. The final result was a process that they've described as feeling rushed. They spent so much time managing the process and the responses that they did not have the time to really evaluate the overall results prior to implementing the new rates. they were unable to analyze the responses and develop an overall cohesive operations strategy based upon the process employed. Now let's take a look at the results for the collaborative bid that was recently completed. After the initial discovery session with the client, we recommended that a comprehensive bid approach be used for their ocean freight because all of their rates were scheduled to expire. Although this shipper has pre-existing relationships with most of the major ocean carriers, we were able to recommend a few new carriers that they did not already use for inclusion in the bid process. The client and CLX collaborated to develop the lanes to be bid, evaluated projected load counts, and determined the baseline costs for savings comparison, as well as the overall strategy and approach. Working in conjunction with each other, the bid packet was developed. The packet contained detailed bid instructions, all required supporting documentation, as well as the list of lanes to be bid. It was designed to clearly define the scope and expectations for the carriers that were participating. The end result was that over 500 lanes were bid. We split them up into 5 separate events so that the participants could focus on selected geographic regions at any given time. On any project we run, the client retains 100% approval on all information that's communicated. No documents were sent out without the client reviewing and approving the information compiled by the CLX team. As part of our standard process for online events, CLX coordinated the training sessions with the participating steamship lines to ensure they were all comfortable logging in and submitting proposals within the application. The training sessions included a review of the instructions packet as well as detailed demonstration with the participants so that they were all comfortable using the system. The CLX team assumed single point of contact responsibility for the process. So in addition to distributing the invitations to the RFP and providing training to everyone who was participating on the use of the software, the CLX team also provided all required administrative support to both the client and the steamship lines throughout the duration of the project. In short, the bid team became the voice of the shipper's transportation department, and both entities worked closely together to ensure that the right message was delivered. As for the results, the competitive bid provided instant market feedback to the ocean carriers. This allowed them to see where they ranked and make adjustments in real time prior to the bid conclusion. This saved time in post-bid negotiations as they already realized where they stood in comparison to the others. By using the online software, the bid submissions were standardized. With no time needed to adjust the format of the submitted rates, optimization scenarios were able to begin upon conclusion of the bid. The client was able to initiate the lane award review process quickly and without having to clear up any discrepancies or inconsistencies in the rates submitted. The final results were that the bid concluded within 2 months from the initial kickoff meeting. The client then had 6 weeks to evaluate the results, make their lane award decisions, and implement the new rates prior to the existing rates expiring. The client identified savings opportunities of 13%, or approximately $3.5 million annually, as compared to their existing rates. It was determined to be a very successful outcome in both time spent and savings achieved. In this case, the client was able to oversee the process while retaining approval rights for the project, but did not have the same time investment as they had needed in the past. The second case study is for a large North American chemical company that ships and tank trucks. Prior to their recent bid, they handled rate negotiations on a carrier-by-carrier basis as business conditions dictated. Each of the carriers that they had used had their own individual fuel and accessorial tariffs. This created additional time and effort both to tender the freight, since strict line haul only comparisons could not be used, as well as creating freight payment inefficiencies since each carrier had unique rates and accessorials. And with the manual processes elsewhere, their rate database was manually updated as needed. So as you can see, it was a relatively informal process for an organization with several thousand shipments per year. For the bid that was just completed, we again utilized our standard process, but tailored to the unique needs of this client as well as the tanker carrier base. ChemLogic's bid team was again involved from the beginning of the process. A comprehensive bid approach was utilized as this client's rates were expiring. However, in this case, since the client has a select number of dedicated lanes, we recommended that those lanes be excluded from the online event. They are subsequently being handled by a detailed offline event with a limited number of participants due to the specific requirements involved with those shipments. Based upon our prior experience, we did not believe dedicated lanes would be a good fit to achieve the best results within the framework of an online environment. In addition to the client's existing list of 11 incumbent carriers, CLX recommended an additional 6 carriers for inclusion based upon those carriers' records of safety, service, price, capacity with other clients of ours. As with the prior case study, the bid team collaborated with the client to develop the strategy, determine lanes, load counts, and baseline costs. A comprehensive bid packet was created as a result of these efforts. Over 200 lanes were bid, covering the U.S. and Canada. They were split into 3 separate events, broken out geographically so that the carriers could concentrate on specific areas at one time. Most of the staff here at CLX has some experience working on the carrier side at some point in our respective paths, so we always try and understand what the carriers need in these events for it to be successful. That's one of the reasons why we will split larger events into smaller groupings. I mentioned it earlier, but overwhelming the participants with too many lanes to focus on at one time can be very stressful to the carriers. They've told us that directly in post-bid feedbacks on prior events. In those cases, I don't believe that you're going to get the best results possible. Online software was used for this bid as well. As with the ocean bid, the CLX team provided detailed training on the software package used, as some of the carriers did not have prior experience with this particular offering. The training covered the instruction packet as well as a detailed review of the bid website. The bid management team again served as a single point of contact after initiating the invitation and training processes. The team provided support to the client and carriers as needed. I've tried to emphasize the importance of a single point of contact, as I believe it's one of the critical points of success for these projects. It ensures that a consistent message is delivered across the board to all involved parties. Any conflicting or ambiguous information in these events can really have a negative impact on the final outcome, and is something that you want to avoid as much as possible. So if we take a look at the results of this event, as with our ocean event, the online software provided real-time feedback to the carriers. The secondary savings that were generated as carriers look to improve their ranking can be significant. In both examples, the participants were able to see their rank, but not what the leading price was. We don't recommend showing the leading price, as that can discourage participants if it's at a level they know they can't meet, or may cause the rates to cluster or right around those points. Typically, we'll see that the participants who do not have the number 1 ranking improve their pricing to varying degrees. Although it might not impact the least cost savings, which looks strictly at the lowest cost possible, the savings generated by the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, etc. ranked carriers, reducing their rates can have real-world impacts when it's time to tender the freight if your primary carrier cannot provide capacity. As part of the strategy process, the client moved to a standard fuel and accessorial tariff for all carriers. This allows them to simply look at the line haul cost to determine which carrier provides the best value on a given lane. Everything other than line haul will be a standard value regardless of the carrier used. It also streamlines freight payment, as the accessorial and fuel surcharges are always the same regardless of the carrier select. And as is standard for online events, the bid submissions were returned in a consistent format so analysis could begin right away instead of trying to fix the submitted information. This allows the shipper to maximize the amount of time they can spend analyzing the results and fine-tuning the decision process for the lane awards. For this particular client, the savings opportunity was approximately 10%, or about $700,000 annually, and the entire process again concluded within 2 months from kickoff. They were able to implement their new rates quickly and thus begin accruing those savings faster. Additionally, by standardizing some of the previously variable costs, they are realizing efficiencies in the freight payment process as well. If you have further questions about any of the items I've covered today, please feel free to contact me. We have non-disclosure agreements in place with all of our clients, so there are limitations as to what I can discuss specifically, but from a process standpoint, we can talk about the protocols we've used successfully over the past few years. At this point, I'd like to turn the presentation back to Mike for a few closing comments. Mike?
Thanks, John. One of the questions that we often hear is, how important is the technology to the success of the bid? The short answer is that it's a key component, but not the biggest driver of success. Our experience has been that strategy and market knowledge are the most vital elements of a successful bid event. The tools and analytics combined are still part of the success. Online software packages are becoming quite commonplace, as you may know. We have experience with several different tools, and we are currently using one that is specifically designed for transportation bids, and it's easy and flexible for everyone to use, including the carriers. But as an old friend of mine once said, when you build a house, you don't buy the tools, you hire the contractor. So it is with transportation bids, where the bid tool is important, but it still needs to be in the most qualified hands in order to get the best result. Another question that we get is, how do carriers respond to an online bid methodology? Again, the short answer is that carriers are a key aspect of the teamwork and negotiations parts of the bid. Online events are fairly common nowadays, and most carriers have participated in them by now. As the software has improved, tools such as the one we employ have become simpler to use. That simplicity has helped the carriers as well, and when combined with the market intelligence that carriers can get from participating in an online bid, we believe that there is specific value for them to participate. So to wrap things up, here are a few points for you to take away. As you've just seen, a well-run bid will follow a well-defined structure, but can still be tailored to the specific needs of a client. It's important to ensure that carrier proposals are achievable on their part. A paper rate does a shipper no good if it's not backed by real capacity when it's needed. A bid process that does not follow an established process may not have the crisp, clear focus that you want to project in the marketplace. If it looks unfocused, the participants may divert their time and energy elsewhere, as they may not feel that your project is a worthwhile investment of their time. And similarly, the bid represents your organization to the marketplace, and a poorly conducted bid is not quickly forgotten. This can impact the responses you receive both during that bid and during the next bid that you need to run. We hope that this presentation has given you a good understanding of the elements of an effective bid strategy and execution, and an informative introduction into how an effective bid process can help to address today's market challenges. If you have any questions or comments, I encourage you to reach out to us. We'll also follow up with an email to each of you that will provide additional contact information. This concludes today's webcast. Thanks for your time and interest, and we look forward to the opportunity to discuss our bid services with you further. Thank you.